Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Alright, without further ado, let us dive straight into the recap of TSUKIMICHI, Moonlit Fantasy Part 38. Alright guys, in the previous video, Makoto and Futsu opened a discussion about the inheritance of the Dragon Mother's power that Futsu will later pass on to Tomoe. On the other side, the situation in Kanaoi suddenly turned into a battlefield when Haruka appeared and tried to take Iroha away from Lime and Levi, which eventually led them into a fierce battle. At the same time, Makoto's students also arrived in Kanaoi and were dragged into a conflict that kept escalating. So in this part, the story focuses on the massive chaos in the city of Kanaoi, starting from the attacks of Tomoki's fanatics to the threat of thousands of troops. The most important encounter is, of course, the direct clash between Makoto and Haruka, which is not only about a contest of strength, but also raises major questions about Tomoki's influence and Haruka's true position. Now let us continue to part 38. The story begins when 14 people approach Makoto with an unmistakable bloodthirsty aura. From their gazes and attitudes, Makoto immediately realizes that all of them have become fanatical worshippers of Tomoki. However, this is not just an ordinary group of fanatics. From their flawless movements and their striking high-class equipment, Makoto knows that they are former elite adventurers or highly trained soldiers. They are clearly opponents that cannot be underestimated. At one point, Makoto actually considers crushing their heads on the spot. However, he restrains himself. He remembers the previous incident when he killed 3 of Tomoki's subordinates in a brutal way. That action became the trigger for a major clash between him and the Origin group, as well as Rose Garden. Here, Makoto begins to think more carefully. He does not want the cycle of revenge to continue endlessly. That is why this time, he chooses a more cautious approach. With a swift movement, he thrusts a needle infused with magic into the neck of one of his enemies. Instantly, his opponent's body goes limp and loses consciousness. For Makoto, killing is no longer the first option. He will only do it if he truly feels a real threat. If not, he is still willing to show mercy. All of that is not merely out of compassion, but to prevent a cycle of hatred that could ultimately hinder the future development of the Kuzunoha company. Meanwhile, at Rotsguard Academy, Izumo receives news about the attack on Restaurant Chihiro. However, he is not overly panicked because he knows that Makoto and his subordinates are currently in the city of Kanaoi. What truly troubles his mind is his fiancée, Iroha, who has now become a target of the rebels. After carefully considering everything, Izumo decides to depart for Kanaoi. He does not want to place the entire burden on Makoto. This time, he wants to take action himself. A few moments later, Shiki appears and looks pleased to see Izumo's decision. Not long after, Makoto's other students also gather. They look enthusiastic and support Izumo's choice to confront his own problem. Izumo himself feels moved. Even though the situation is dangerous, his friends are still willing to help without hesitation. As usual, Shiki raises his staff with both hands and draws a circle in the air without chanting a spell. Thick white mist slowly emerges from the circle. Long story short, all of them transfer to Kanaoi through that mist. Upon arriving there, Izumo immediately sees Lime standing beside a girl who turns out to be Iroha. The atmosphere feels awkward because their reunion happens right in the middle of a battlefield. Lime welcomes the group and calmly explains the situation. In short, the top priority right now is to protect Princess Iroha. Without wasting any time, Lime hands Iroha over to Izumo and the students. He instructs them to move immediately along the escape route that was previously planned with Iroha's group. He also emphasizes one important thing: do not hesitate. If they are certain that someone is an enemy, then they must cut them down immediately. Hesitation will only end in death. Izumo and Iroha's eyes meet again, and both of them feel embarrassed because they have not seen each other for a long time, especially since their reunion is happening in such a critical situation. To lighten the mood, Iroha's guards begin introducing themselves. Akashi greets them enthusiastically, while Sogetsu jokingly encourages Izumo to survive this long night so that they can soon set a wedding date. That remark makes Izumo even more embarrassed, and his friends cannot hold back their laughter. However, the light atmosphere does not last long. After that, Izumo, the students, and Iroha's attendants immediately move toward a safer location. That night, their goal is already clear: to protect Iroha no matter what happens. On the other side, Makoto continues to face waves of enemies who have been brainwashed by Tomoki. The number is truly unreasonable. Around 60 people have already been incapacitated by his magic needles, and there is still no sign of it stopping. What makes the situation even more irritating is that these attackers are not merely ordinary fanatics. Their hatred toward Makoto is intensely palpable. There is even one person who recklessly straps explosives to his body and attempts to detonate himself by hugging Makoto. However, Makoto moves quickly. He tries to stop the suicide attempt without killing his opponent. After successfully preventing the explosion, he once again uses his magic needle to render that person unconscious. In the middle of that chaos, a report comes in from Mio. Mio has secured various cooking ingredient shops, from soy sauce and miso to other kitchen supplies. She actually wants to immediately assist Makoto on the front line. However, Makoto refuses. He says that Tomoe is already there, so it is better for Mio to focus on evacuating the civilians. Mio accepts the order without arguing. Even so, Makoto feels that something is different. He deliberately gives Mio another task so that she does not join the battle. After hearing about Mio's fierce fight against Rokuya earlier, Makoto feels guilty and does not want to burden her any further. Although Mio obeys, Makoto still feels as if there is hidden sadness behind her attitude. A few moments later, Makoto shifts his focus to the leader of the enemy. Among the crowd of attackers, he senses one individual whose strength far surpasses the others, on par with an elite adventurer. For a moment, he wonders whether Lime and Levi, who are guarding the restaurant, are able to handle her. However, he is confident that they can at least hold her off for a while. In fact, Makoto already has a guess about the identity of that woman, and so far, his intuition is rarely wrong. Not long after that, another report comes from Rokuya. The number of enemies is now estimated to have reached tens of thousands. Makoto has actually already realized that and intends to handle it himself. However, this time Rokuya volunteers to step in. Makoto is surprised. Rokuya admits that he went too far during the battle in the labyrinth, so at the very least he wants to repay the favor by helping now. More than that, Rokuya proposes something quite surprising. He wants to make Kogetsu a new ally. Even though Kogetsu is the one responsible for the rebellion and the entry of many foreign enemies into Kanaoi, according to Rokuya, that is precisely why Kogetsu understands the city's situation very well. If he is involved, resolving the problem could proceed more quickly and efficiently. While thinking about all of that, Makoto remains focused on his main task. He makes sure that the troops and patrols outside the city remain under control, that the attackers who have already been subdued are immediately secured so that the citizens do not panic and kill them, and that the evacuation process carried out by the members of Picnic Rose Garden and the Kuzunoha Company stays properly coordinated. However, the situation changes again when Makoto realizes that the barrier at Restaurant Chihiro has been destroyed. He is surprised because the destruction happens far more quickly than he expected. Without wasting any time, he immediately contacts Tomoe. Tomoe reports that Lime and Levi are still alive, so Makoto does not need to worry about that. However, she also explains that both of them were somewhat careless. When they sensed Makoto's presence in the city, Lime and Levi became overly confident and assumed that the battle was already under control. The enemy takes advantage of that carelessness. Several of Levi's legs are even severed, which causes Levi to go into a rage. In that chaos, the barrier is ultimately destroyed. Alright guys, just as a reminder, Levi comes from the Scylla race, with a human upper body and a lower body resembling an octopus. That is why she has many legs, and losing several of them is certainly not a small matter. Alright, let us continue the story. Tomoe continues giving her report. She also mentions the arrival of Shiki and the students, although the details will be explained directly by Shiki later. In addition, Tomoe informs Makoto that Haruka is moving toward Iroha's location. After receiving Tomoe's report, Makoto decides to divide the roles. He states that he will focus on protecting Iroha, while Tomoe is asked to deal with Kogetsu. Tomoe immediately understands his intention. Makoto clearly wants to utilize Kogetsu's ability and influence to stabilize the chaotic city of Kanaoi. After that, Makoto uses his Sakai to observe the movements of Jin and the other students. From a distance, he can see them fighting desperately. Unlike Makoto, who is able to incapacitate his enemies, the students do not have that luxury. At their level, incapacitating opponents is nearly impossible, so they are forced to kill in order to survive. Their combat experience is clearly far inferior compared to the attackers who are filled with killing intent. Their situation is truly severe. Makoto does not want to lose a single one of his students. If someone dies while he is nearby, he will consider that a failure on his part as a teacher. He has already dealt with the enemies around him, but his head begins to feel heavy from thinking about too many things at once. Even so, his determination grows stronger. All of this chaos must end immediately. On the other side, the students are now facing waves of increasingly powerful enemies. Their opponents are clearly high-level fighters. Even so, their focus does not change, protecting Iroha and Izumo. Even Iroha's attendants stare in astonishment at the students' strength. However, that admiration does not change the fact that they are still struggling against enemies of this caliber. Izumo himself feels frustrated because he has to face so many powerful opponents at the same time. Seeing the situation becoming increasingly unfavorable, Iroha makes an important decision. She speaks to the ancient sword Enkaref and declares her willingness to offer the sword Hotarumaru as food for Enkaref in exchange for its assistance. As a reminder, Enkaref is an ancient sword belonging to the dwarves that was previously entrusted to Makoto before he entered the labyrinth. Upon hearing that offer, Enkaref responds with enthusiasm. A contract is formed. Enkaref devours Hotarumaru, then immediately flies forward and charges toward the enemy with greatly increased power. However, the situation changes again when a voice is heard calling out to Iroha. Instantly, Misura's body shivers. He senses an extremely terrifying aura. Without hesitation, he warns Dina and Jin not to move recklessly. Unfortunately, Yuno has already stepped forward toward the approaching shadow. In an instant, Yuno is casually thrown aside by that figure. Misura immediately charges with his sword. As the distance between them closes, it becomes clear that the figure is a woman whose body is covered in wounds. In one swift sequence of movements, Misura's armor is shattered, his body is pierced, and his neck is slashed. He is severely injured in a single moment. The other students quickly try to save Misura and Yuno, and that is when the identity of the attacker is revealed. The woman is Iroha's own mother, Haruka. Sogetsu questions Haruka's reason for destroying the city and targeting Iroha. However, Haruka appears indifferent. Instead, she invites Iroha to return home, saying that her daughter no longer needs to be involved in a political marriage. Even while injured, Misura still raises his greatsword and points it at Haruka. He firmly states that parents should not interfere in their child's future, then suggests that Haruka should withdraw and heal her own wounds. At the same time, Haruka notices many small swords beginning to target her. With 2 naginata in her hands, she knocks down those small swords one by one. The swords then regroup near Iroha and merge once more into Enkaref. Even after witnessing Haruka's terrifying strength, Makoto's students do not retreat. They remain standing and continue to fight. However, long story short, one by one they are defeated by Haruka. Amid the destruction, Izumo still struggles to stand. With a staff in one hand and a katana in the other, he forces himself to endure. Seeing this, Haruka, in a tone of curiosity, questions whether the combined attack they just unleashed was truly the limit of their abilities. Hearing that condescending question, Izumo looks at Haruka with anger that he cannot hide. For him, the desperate struggle of his friends is not something that can be treated as boring entertainment. He refuses to accept that his comrades and the people he protects are looked down upon. However, Haruka does not care at all about the voice of someone she considers weak. Instead, she asserts that Izumo should already know very well what kind of power she possesses, and indeed, Izumo knows. Haruka has Hakki Yagyo, a high-level ability that allows her to summon hundreds of monsters as shields while also disrupting magic. More than that, she is a human anomaly who seems to possess the power of several wise individuals within a single body. That fact makes Izumo realize how slim their chances truly are. Even so, Izumo still intends to use all of his remaining strength to face Haruka. However, before he can truly force himself any further, a voice is heard telling him to stop. When he turns toward the source of that voice, relief immediately fills him. At the same time, Haruka sounds surprised. Without realizing it, her neck has already been pierced by a small needle, and in an instant, the newly arrived figure is standing between her and Izumo. Makoto has finally arrived. Izumo entrusts everything to Makoto and immediately collapses from exhaustion. Meanwhile, Haruka clearly recognizes Makoto as Tomoki's enemy. In the middle of that situation, Makoto quickly thinks through the circumstances. He knows that Kogetsu has actually been killed by Haruka. However, Tomoe uses an illusion and arrives just in time, disturbing the boundary between life and death so that Kogetsu can return. After that, Tomoe immediately orders Kogetsu and his subordinates to cooperate in stabilizing the city of Kanaoi, which is currently engulfed in chaos. However, Makoto's needle strike turns out to be not enough to bring Haruka down. Haruka admits that she has grown bored of facing opponents who are too weak. Then, she activates her trump card, Wings of the Saint. With that ability, the wounds and poison in her body immediately disappear, and her power increases as well. Makoto calmly states that he will incapacitate Haruka soon. For a brief moment, he glances at his students lying on the ground. Behind all this chaos, he acknowledges their growth. The battle against Haruka has actually become a stepping stone for their development. Haruka herself declares that no one in this world is comparable to her. Hearing that, Makoto instead thanks her for being the perfect opponent to sharpen his students. He even says that this will be Haruka's final battle in this world, so she does not need to feel bored fighting weak enemies anymore. In an instant, Makoto moves and thrusts a needle into Haruka's chest. His speed surprises her, even though the needle shatters immediately. Without stopping, Makoto attacks again with a fire-infused needle. Haruka tries to evade while swinging her two naginata. However, Makoto is far faster. He catches both weapons with his bare hands, then strikes Haruka with his magic armor, sending her body flying into the air. Suddenly, Haruka disappears midair. It turns out that she uses a massive chunk of rock that is thrown along with her and leaps back toward Makoto. She summons a monster, inserts it into her weapon, then attacks with a blade wrapped in black mud. Makoto immediately blocks the weapon and thrusts a needle into Haruka's shoulder. She falls, but rises again after summoning another monster. Haruka now admits that Makoto is a terrifying monster. Even so, she still has no intention of surrendering. In the middle of the battle, Makoto senses that something is off. He begins to suspect that Haruka has broken free from Tomoki's charm. If she were still under Tomoki's control, the students should have been killed without hesitation. However, the fact is that they are still alive. That means Haruka deliberately leaves an opening. Makoto is shocked when he realizes that possibility. However, what confuses him is one thing. If Haruka has already freed herself from Tomoki's charm, then why does she still insist on attacking him? So, that is the recap of part 38 from TSUKIMICHI, Moonlit Fantasy.